Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Words of Life podcast with your host, Adam Kitt, and my brother-in-law, Kevin Bruni. What's up, Kev? How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Adam?
I am great. Absolutely loving spring out here in Tennessee. It's a little flighty on it can't decide what temperature it wants to stay at all the time. So we've got these mid-70s days, which are just gorgeous. And then it's I think tomorrow we're going to be 40. Okay. So you got this little bit of a roller coaster, but it hasn't been extreme at all. We're loving it. How about you guys?
Yeah, we've had a little bit of that out here. It was 80 over the weekend, and then at least Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday, and today when we're recording here Monday, it's raining all day, and then it's supposed to be back up to 85 by the end of the weekend again. So
it's great. Actually, we ended up having a one of those electric skillets. Somehow it ended up staying on for who knows how long. And we came back. I'm glad it didn't burn down the house, but the whole house was super hot. So I actually turned the air conditioner on for a little while the last couple of days, just because it was stuffy in the house, So, but all right. Well, hey, getting into our podcast for this week, this topic, I think we can finish the book of Esther today. We're really getting into the climax of the main story. As if you guys recall, last week we ended chapter 6. Chapter 6, that's right. Where Esther had set up these two feasts for the king and for Haman. And Haman just got called away to the second feast. And that's where we will be picking up our story today. Lots of fantastic lessons that have really stuck with me from this study. I think the biggest one obviously is just being open to the providence of God, and being ready and willing to allow opportunities and allow me to get to work, take those opportunities and the advantages of things like that. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think that's probably the key one, right? This willingness to step in and God will often say, you're looking for someone to stand in the gap, right? Looking for someone to step in and do that job, do that work. And so that's kind of the key lesson here, I think, that we get from Esther, right? And her humility while still being bold in the way that she's going to approach the king is, another thing I think we could take and apply, sort of generally. That even when we're being bold and we're a step before God, we can still come with the spirit of humility. And not just because we're humble before the person per se, because we're humble before God, right? So that reflects in how we interact with others as well. So,
well, and you really saw that when she asked Mordecai to have all of the Jews fast and pray for several days prior to her going before the king. And that's a real big takeaway, that we need to have that level of faith as well, so we are ready, willing, and able to set ourselves aside for a period of time to fast and to pray and to really focus ourselves spiritually on something of magnitude, like she was trying to save her people. So it's fantastic. Let's get into our text then. Add our text back here. So this is where we ended up last week, where while they were yet talking with him, this is, of course, Haman talking to his family, who previously had given him this advice to, you need to get that guy. Oh, wait, you didn't tell us he was a Jew.
Right.
If you've already begun to fall before him, because that guy's got God on his side. So Haman is in a real pickle. The king's eunuchs arrive, hurried Haman away to the feast that Esther had prepared. And that's where we pick up this week. Why don't you go ahead and take the first section there if you want to read, or just quickly read through some of it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, right. So let's just read the first part here, because it kind of sets up the story for us today. So the king and Haman went to the feast with Queen Esther, and on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if I please the king, let my life be granted for my wish and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. And if we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So you get this story here, right, where she's gone in 2 days now at this feast, and he's asked her, this is the third time now. What do you want, right? The first time it was just come to a feast. And he asked her again at that one, "What do you want?" Come to another feast. This is the third ask now. Same thing, up to half the kingdom. And she says, "What I'm asking for is my life and the life of my people, because we've been sold to be destroyed." And this is a shock or a surprise to the king, which is interesting. Because it makes me wonder how many decrees he signed lately to wipe out a group of people, right? It's like, wait, who did this? What are you talking about, right? Or maybe he's just so surprised because he doesn't know she's Jewish that she could have been Jewish, right? And so, she answers and rats out, this is the guy, this is the foe, this is the enemy, Haman right here. He's the one who's dared.
If I recall, didn't the king just give the signet ring to
Haman?
I mean,
he did say, there's this people, whatever, that are
trust
follow your
you
rules
to
and your
take care
things.
of it for me,
So he knew there was something.
It wasn't very, important
in the loop,
to the
maybe.
king.
Yeah,
whatever. It's I trust you. You're my guy, right?
Yeah, if you've got some sort of people that are insurrectionists in the kingdom, take care of them. You can't imagine the queen would be among that number. But he points
them
out.
This is the ultimate plot twist.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if movie makers have used this type of a setup forever, where the guy thinks he's all that, only to arrive at the end and have everything turn on its head and fall down on his face.
Yeah, the one who's in control is not, right.
Yep.
He thinks he's very much in control, and slowly over the last chapter we've seen that he's not as in control as he thinks. And that quick turnaround from chapter 6, right, as you've begun to fall, right, here we see it play out. Now, in the verse we read, we don't see what's happened there. We're going to see it play out. She's outed him is what's happened at this point. But what comes next then is sort of the retribution against him. But this is sort of the key pivot, right, in the text that now Haman has been pointed out.
She sets up the king, and her favor with the king perfectly, and obviously God is with her, and he is blessing her, and she's finding favor in everything that she does. And of course, then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So is now, immediately dropped his eyes in front of the king. So it picks up in verse 7. So the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. So it was very apparent. The king's like, I don't like this. This is not okay. How dare you plot to kill my wife, basically, right? The woman that I love. So yeah, he's shaking in his boots, so to speak, right?
Yeah, so he sort of storms out, right, to cool off, figure out what he wants to do, etc. Right? And so Haman stays behind and begs the queen, right? Figures, hey, Queen Esther, if I can beg her and convince her, she can convince the king to spare me, right?
Right.
Seems to be the play there.
Yeah.
But it's gonna turn out really interesting. It reminds me a little bit of the Joseph story here, in that the king comes back in verse 8 and he sees Haman basically falling on the couch next to Esther where she's at, begging her, pleading with her. When he sees that, he interprets it as him assaulting the queen in his own house, right? And so it's not exactly the same, but I always am reminded of the Joseph story when she falls on the thing and it's like, oh, lay with me, right? And he's trying to escape from her, and then she has his robe as he runs, right? And goes, look, this is what he left behind, right? And he gets accused of trying to assault the wife there in that story. A little bit of role reversal or gender reversal here, but it's very similar in that way. So he sees this and he just loses it, right? And so it's just, that's it. At this point, it's not even Esther asking or saying, hey, let's do this to Haman. The king's just on, right?
So the Haman is in such distress. He's literally like pleading with his life on the couch where she was, right? So verse 8 says, the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine. As Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was, and the king's like, is he going to even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?
Yeah.
Right? And as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. So I don't know if they put a bag over his face, over his head, or what they did, but he was out of there, right? And Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. So Haman went from like highest to lowest real fast.
Yeah, a matter of like 2 days, right?
How the mighty do fall, right?
Yeah. And this guy comes in. It's quite interesting. One of his eunuchs goes, hey, we got this guy. I mean, they drag him out, and he's like, well, there's these gallows that he built at his house, right? And the king's like, perfect, hang him on that, right? Like that'll do it. And then that sort of placates the king, or his wrath abates there, right? And so that's again this. These proverbs that you read about, right? That the one who digs a pit will fall into it, kind of a thing, and that's what's going on here. He's built these gallows. He's getting hung on his own gallows that he's built for Mordecai.
Pride cometh before a fall.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, he's hung there. But, interestingly, this doesn't really solve the problem of the Jews, right? This is just really the immediate issue of Haman. But, you still got this other thing hanging out there that she had requested, right? Give me the life of my people. That hasn't been addressed yet. So, his wrath is gone at the direct assault of the queen in his presence. But there's still a little more, right? That the resolution hasn't happened here as far as Esther is concerned.
Yeah. One of the things we actually kind of skipped over that I forgot to talk about was in her plea with the king back in verse 4 and 5, is if we've been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent. For our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king, right? Yeah. So it's super humble. Like, hey, if you had just sold us as slaves, we would still be alive. We would still be able to serve God. We'd still be able to, right? But that's not what's happening. That we've been sold to be killed, to be annihilated. So there's that distinction there. But it's interesting that she brings that up. It's like, if it was anything else,
right,
we would have just put up with it. We would have suffered in tribulation and whatever, because we are servants of the king. So he can technically do whatever he wants with us, except for kill us. We don't want you to kill us.
That's right.
So, right. So anyway, we're picking up, go ahead and in the next little section here. So the wrath of the king, the immediate hot-headed, ness of the king abated as Haman is drug away to be hung. Chapter 8, with the heading there, Esther saves the Jews.
Yeah, okay, so you kind of roll into this next section here, right? And we're going to get all the the resolution, if you will, right? You think about a story and that builds up to the climax, and you have the end there, and then you have this resolution phase as the story plays out in the end. And that's kind of what 8, 9, and 10 are. You get, first of all, Mordecai is going to come in here on that same day. Mordecai is going to come in before the king, and he's going to be put in Haman's place, right? So Haman's been destroyed. His lands, his titles, his whatever are forfeit at this point. And so he gives it to Mordecai instead. Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman, which at the end of verse 2. And so now he's got this position of Haman, right? Which is, let's say, well-deserved, I guess, right? I mean, he's proven himself loyal to the king. He's found this plot against the king. The king knows who this guy is, not just some random person. But we didn't have really that they were related, right? We see that in verse 1. Esther had told what he was to her, right?
Yeah. He's basically my dad.
Yeah. So you see that here, right? He's my cousin / surrogate father.
Yeah.
And so now, the king elevates Mordecai to this place. Hey, you've done these things. You're also, cousin to the queen effectively. And so you're going to be my new guy here in this role of Haman. And so now we really have that full reversal, right? That not only has Haman been destroyed, but now Mordecai has been placed in his place, right?
Mordecai,
so it's like,
his enemy.
Yeah, insult to injury kind of a thing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it would have been enough just to destroy Haman, and that would have been the end. But now Mordecai is put into his place, right? Instead. But, we see in verse 3 that Esther is still speaking to the king. She falls at his feet and weeps and pleaded with him. And so, like we said, even though this issue of Haman's been resolved, there's still this outstanding thing, this, death warrant that's gone out through all the kingdom, all 127 provinces, saying on such and such a date, you can get together and kill the Jews and take their stuff, right? And so she hasn't really resolved that issue yet. And so you see that there, she's trying to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, the plot that he devised against the Jews. And so she does the very similar thing. She goes for the king. He holds out the scepter to her, just like we saw before. She rises up, and then says, "Hey, can we revoke these letters? Can we revoke the things that Haman had done to destroy the Jews? Because I can't bear to see the destruction of my kindred." Right. But we see down at the very end there, verse 8, right? He says, "Here, you can have the ring, you can have the thing, write what you want to write, but in the name of the king, seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." So that's interesting, because he's sort of saying to her, "Hey, write whatever you want to defend your people." But at the same time, he's letting us know as the readers, well, why didn't he just say cancel that order? Right? Because that's not what they're going to do here, right? They're not going to say cancel that order. You can't kill the Jews anymore. They're going to have to write a new order, which is interesting in our modern minds. Like, why can't we just veto the previous one or write a new law saying that law is no good? But what he's telling us right here, right? Anything that's been written by the king and sealed with his ring cannot be revoked. So the king can't just revoke his previous order in that way, and that should sound familiar to us, right? We saw similar things in like Daniel. Daniel in the lion's den, right? Hey, write this thing in the law of the Medes and the Persians that whatever is written can't be changed, that anyone who bows down or asks any god or man for anything except for you, king, gets thrown into the lion's den. And he says, that sounds good. And then he finds out it's Daniel, and instead of him just going, oop, I write a new order, he says, my hands are tied, effectively, right? And so he goes, hey, your God will save you, and he throws him into the lion's den. And so the similar thing's happening here. Hey, I'd like to do something, but I can't directly, so we're gonna have to come up with a workaround, if you will, right? We have to write a new rule that will allow you to stand up to the old rule. We can't just cancel it. And so that's what's going to happen as they play this out here in the next sort of a section here.
I think one of the other lessons we can learn is, again, from Esther, her attitude, her humility, and the way that she speaks to the king. Even though she knows she's found favor in his sight, she does not take that for granted at all. In verse 5, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right to the king, before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, right? If all those things, I'm hoping and praying that all those things are true, so that, you'll be able to make this thing happen. And then, of course, everything we just talked about, right? So, so what edict did they end up writing?
Yeah, so in verse 11, we'll see very clearly there. I mean, there's the dates and things like that. But when you get down to verse 11, we see that the edict is that the king allows the Jews in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women including, and to plunder their goods. Right. So basically, he gives them a royal decree that says you may defend yourselves against the people that try and assault you or attack you on this particular day, right? Which is interesting because, you might have thought they already had that. If anyone tries to kill you and take you, you'd think, well, I can defend myself, right? But here, the answer is no, because the king had written the decree previously that says we're going to annihilate all of you. So you could try and fight back. But even if you had been successful, then what, right? Well, now you've defied a direct order of the king if you successfully defend your life. And so now he's writing a thing that says, hey, if you can successfully defend your life, the king won't punish you for that, right? It's basically, the first one was, I'm giving everyone the ability to come and just wipe you all out. And now he's saying, I'm giving you the ability to fight back. So now it's a fair fight. Y'all work it out, right? Kind of a deal.
Whatever happens.
Happens, right? It's the best I can do. I can't undo the previous order, but I can give you the right to defend yourselves. in my second order here, right? And
Yep.
if you win, you can take their stuff, right? The first one was if they kill you, they can plunder you, and if you beat them, you can take their stuff. And so you get this sort of back and forth here, this back and forth thing here that plays out. Now, why is that maybe good for the Jews? I mean, at this point, at least, you've got Mordecai having been elevated to this position. We'll see that play out a little bit later in the next chapter also. So that means right now you're not just fighting against these people who've been said to be dangerous and different customs and different laws to the kingdom. Now you're fighting against these people. And oh, by the way, the queen is one of them. And oh, by the way, the queen's cousin who raised her is second to the king. Go ahead and fight them if you want, but they can fight back, right?
Yeah.
And so now you're going to be like, well, maybe I should double think. I mean, this seemed like easy pickings and a get rich quick sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
To kill these people and I'd be doing the king's work at the same time. Now, I'm not sure.
It might be in our favor to actually be friends with the Jews.
Yeah, maybe I'll help them on that day
on the other side. Yeah, right.
Yeah, because you could always point back to the law if you had killed some Jews and taken their stuff.
Yeah,
but the king might still not be happy with you because apparently he likes them, right? So maybe I don't want to be on that side anymore.
The political tides have definitely swung in the favor of the Jews, and so it's probably better for us to be on their side rather than, against them for sure.
That's right.
It wasn't mentioned before when the decree was sent out previously, but I don't know if it's significant at all. But in verse 10, Mordecai wrote it out and sealed it with the king's signet ring. He sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, right? And these were like the king's very best horses were being used as courier mounts to deliver this letter. So
yeah, that's a little different. I mean, the last time we just saw the couriers carried them out, right?
Yep.
But we didn't see any. That was back in chapter 3:15. Couriers went out hurriedly with the king's command. But we don't get any additional thing that they took the fastest horses this time, right? The king's personal stock. And part of that, I'm sure, of some of the urgency, right? We need to get this message out to these people before this date. And again, I think the king here is not just, or not the king specifically, but Mordecai, right, as he's writing this decree. It's partly to let everyone know, not just they can defend themselves, but it's maybe to make people think twice, right, about stepping up. So the sooner I can get that word out to people, the better. People might go, wait a minute, cancel the lynching party that we had scheduled because I don't want to be on the wrong side.
And what's super interesting, like think about the scope and scale of this decree, how vast the kingdom was.
Yeah,
from
127 provinces, it says, right?
From Ethiopia to Greece, right? I mean, that was a lot of couriers, a lot of swift horses being sent out to all parts of the known world, basically. And they had to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, the dates there, right?
Necessarily, like how much time did they have to get them out before the original decree date was going to happen? But
it's going to be like about 9 months, right? If I'm doing this math right. So the third month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, the edict was written according to Mordecai.
Right.
And the original date was supposed to be in the 12th month, the 13th day of the 12th month. Okay. So they got about 9 months roughly. But like you say, this is not the email age, right?
Right.
You got to send someone on a courier on a horse quickly to get across the kingdom here to spread this message. So it would take, I don't know, a month. Some chunk of time
to get from Babylon to Jerusalem, going to the upper arch, like eight weeks maybe. I don't know. It was a long way.
Yeah,
by foot, even horse feet. A lot of miles. Miles had to be covered. So
so it's interesting too at the end of this chapter here, right down in 15. So they send this decree out, right? Mm-hmm. And basically the decree at this point is, it's an all-out brawl on the 13th day of the 12th month, right? And yet the reaction in 15 through 17 there at the end, Mordecai goes out in the royal robes. That's all fine. The city of Susa shouts and rejoices. I don't know if that's so much because they didn't like Haman, they liked Mordecai, or just anytime the king elevates someone, you rejoice and shout to get on his good side. Or, yay, we're so happy, right? But then we see this thing that's interesting to me. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and every city where the king's command and edict reach, there's gladness among the Jews and a feast and a holiday, right? And then we get the next part in a minute there. But at this point, nothing's even happened. They've just been told you can defend themselves, and they're already having a holiday about this, right?
Yeah.
Saying we're going to be delivered, we're going to be saved just because we've got this. And then you see the very end of that was, and many people declared themselves Jews because the fear of the Jews had overcome them, right?
I'm a Jew now.
I'm a Jew now, right?
Yes.
And whether they're actually converting, right? Or if some of the translations will say many people became Jews, right? So maybe they were proselytizing over and following the law. Or maybe it was as this translation here. Maybe they declared themselves Jews because, hey, that's now the group that's on the inside. Apparently, the queen is a Jew. The second in command is a Jew. We want to be on their side.
Yeah.
But that's going to be important in chapter 9 when the actual day rolls around, right? So what you're seeing is now, instead of this being a subset of the people, I mean, it's still going to be a subset of the entire nation, right? But it's a larger subset, a larger group of people that are now on the side that we're going to be destroyed. And those ones who aren't, now they are friendly towards them, right? And so that's going to change the equation here when we get to the 12th month and the 13th day, that this whole thing is supposed to go down in chapter 9.
Which we'll get to right now. And chapter 9 is, it's pretty cut and dry. It's a lot of details about how it all played out. There's some people mentioned and, and all that. But let's go ahead and read through it quickly. That way we're not skipping over any of the details. But starting in verse 1, it says, now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all peoples. All the officials of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and also killed Parshandatha and Dalphon and Aspatha and Poratha and Adalia and Aridatha and Parmashta and Arasai and Aradai and Vaizatha, whoever those are, right? Apparently important guys that hated the Jews. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they laid no hand on the plunder. So they basically routed everybody who hated them across the whole kingdom, but didn't want to have anything to do with plundering their goods.
Yeah, which is sort of their verse, right? Like that was what the motivation was, to destroy the Jews. You could take their stuff, right. And the reverse was decreed, but they don't do that, right? They kill the people, they defend themselves effectively.
Yep.
But they don't plunder their things. And those 10 guys, those names are the 10 sons of Haman, as far as I could tell, right? Those names are the 10 sons of Haman that they kill. In verse 8, 7-8, those 10 names should be the 10 sons of Haman in verse 10. But that's just telling us what happens in the city, right? They killed 500 in the citadel, in Susa, in the city.
Yep.
And so, that's just there. And so you have this additional thing in the next part, right? In 11 through 13, that very day, the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows, right? So he says, let's go for round 2. That's what should happen here, right? I don't know what's happened in all the provinces, but let's if there's any stragglers that want to do harm to the Jews, let's let everyone know tomorrow. Go ahead and go again.
Let's make sure we're cleaning house fully.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it looks like it's tricky to say here, right? If you read the first part, it looks like they killed the 10 sons of Haman, and then she asks to hang them on the gallows. So does that mean they killed them and they hung their bodies on display, or does she say, let's hang the 10 sons of Haman, and that's how they're killed, right? And then so either way,
the result is the same.
The result is that they're wiping out the line of Haman, right? So it's not
Yeah.
just Haman's destroyed; it's his family, and his family
Yeah.
name is his line. And as you keep going into 16 and on, what we see is they do this in all the other things, right? So the question was, what have they done in the rest of the provinces, right? Well, we see it here. Down when you get into 16, they killed 75,000 of their enemies, but laid no hands on the plunder. So as they go out through the rest of the kingdom, the 127 provinces, right? We see that there are some who still try to attack the Jews, but the Jews overpower them. Which is interesting. There are still some who tried to attack them and take them when it said that all the, so you go to a province, right? And people decide, I'm going to have my lynch mob to go out and round up some Jews. And the people, the princes, the satraps, who's ever ruling, the governor of that region, he's on the side of the Jews, it says, right? Because they're afraid of Mordecai, who's kind of their boss now, right? So they're helping out the Jews to stamp out these people who are trying to wipe them out. So how could they kill 75,000? Well, they had basically government backing, right, to help them do that, to defend themselves. And so, like we said, you don't really see God anywhere in this book by name, and yet you can see sort of here him working through the government that he's established, that he's got the Jews sort of set up in at this point in history, and he's using them to carry the sword, right, and to defend his people who were innocent in all of these matters. And so we see his providence, you may call it, or his system set up how the government's supposed to work, carrying out its design purpose, right? It's taking care of these people who had done nothing wrong in the first place. And so they do all this, and this happens, on the 13th and the 14th day, and they rest on the 15th day. And so in 19, therefore the Jews of the villages who live in the rural towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day of which they send gifts of food to one another, right? And so then we'll get in 20 through the end of the chapter, we get sort of the official proclamation, if you will, of the Feast of Purim, right? We say, why is this book here? What's the purpose of it? Back at the beginning. And it really is to sort of explain to the Jews, where did this holiday that we celebrate come from, right? And so this is a story I'm sure they tell on that day. Say, hey, we say it's kind of written as like a story you might tell to your children. Hey, why do we celebrate? And they're explaining that celebration to them. And so we see that here, that Mordecai records all these things, sends letters to all the Jews in the provinces, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same year, year by year, as the day on which the Jews got relief from their enemies. In the month they'd been turned from them from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holiday. They should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor, right? So it's now written down in the records, right, that this is a feast and a thing that we will keep year after year on these days, right? The day on the 14th that we had done this thing, which was the second day, right, that Esther said, give us another day. And then the 15th, the day of rest, that they'd celebrated because of their victory, right? So the day of their victory and the day they celebrated become a perpetual holiday here going forward. And if you keep going there, you'll see that it just keeps getting explained as you keep moving through the thing. They agreed to this, they do this, right? And so we get this holiday that's carried on amongst them there.
And it's still celebrated today.
Yeah, and again, I think that's right. That was sort of the point of this at the time it's writing, right? Is why do we have this? Why do we do this thing? Here's why: we were given a great deliverance from our enemies. And you see this thing here. It's kind of a common refrain, perhaps, right, in the Jewish history and also in Christianity as a whole. This idea of things being turned from sorrow into gladness, from mourning into a holy day, right? And so it's not just that, hey, it's a really good day for us. It's the reversal that's being celebrated as well, right? This was supposed to be a day of sorrow, but it has been turned into a day of gladness, right? This is supposed to be a day of our destruction, and it's been turned into a day of our deliverance. So this reversal is what's common here and what's being celebrated in their deliverance.
Yep. And so we see, kind of just wrapping it up, the story here. Oops, did I go too far?
Yeah.
So we see here just, the decree went out, and Mordecai had written it down for him. So Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is the lots. He had cast these lots on what day was they were going to be annihilated, right? So this is just kind of a summary of the events that took place and why they're doing this celebration. It's just kind of dictating what Mordecai had sent out to everybody. Therefore, they call these days Purim, after the term pur. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring, and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written and at the time appointed every year. And I think that's fantastic. And that it's still celebrated today is a testament to how powerful the word of the Lord is, how powerful the Bible is, how great, the characters and the events that took place that are recorded for us, and how powerful they are. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and these, if you're trying to remember back in your reading as we went through this, right? This thing's being recounted is back in chapter 3, right? So back in chapter 3, when Mordecai Haman came up with this plan, he cast lots to determine the day on the destruction, and that term for lot, that word for lot, is where this thing comes from. So you're like, where did this happen? Go back to chapter 3, read it again,
Yep.
And you can see that he cast the lot in the first year, and it came up on the 12th month on the 13th day, right? And so that's how he had determined his date in the first place.
Right.
So
I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, our modern day, we don't necessarily cast lots, but we roll dice, or there's lots of ways for us to come up with a random
chance
event. So
flip a coin, whatever.
Flip a coin, toss the dice. And a lot of video games use random number generators, the dreaded RNG,
yep.
right? And so whatever it was, whether it was rolling the bones or going to see an article or drawing straws, whatever it was, he randomly was able to determine, based on this casting of the lots, this date. And of course, with Queen Esther's courage and Mordecai's encouragement, she was able to go before the king, and they were victorious over all the enemies.
Yeah, I do like as well. One thing that we kind of just glossed over there a minute ago was, how they celebrated this thing, right? So they say, we're gonna confirm this as a holiday. We're gonna create it as a thing. Here's the dates it's gonna be done. You're gonna observe it in this way, and it's appointed seasons there, right? But it's sort of previous to this. If you just back up one there, the way they were going to celebrate it there was be a day of feasting, gladness, and days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor, right? And so one of the ways in which they celebrated this holiday was that you would send gifts of food, house to house, or to your neighbors, your friends, right? Which is things that sometimes still get done today in certain holidays. I know in our neighborhood where we live, Christmas rolls around, and what will happen is people on our street, you'll come home and you'll have a basket on your door. Someone's left, some cookies, or, we did bread. I made bread and sent it to all our neighbors this past year, right? So, we do this thing of giving some gifts of food. That's a fairly common way to celebrate holidays. It goes way back to here. But also this idea of giving gifts to the poor, right? That the way they were going to celebrate this was to give gifts to those who did not have, right? Sort of an interesting thing, because you kind of think about, in what way does that tie in with a holiday, right? I mean, they killed people, they plundered people, right? You're like, where was the poor involved? Nowhere, right? But it was just a thing that you do. You take care of the poor, right? Like, and that's quite common actually in the Old Testament. When you look through the Old Law, when you look through, what God is on their case for in the prophets, that they've abused the widow, the orphan, and the poor. And so, they make it a part of their holiday to look out for the poor, because God likes the poor, right? You should care for them.
Yeah.
And so they just roll that in there as a thing they do, right? You give gifts of food to one another and the poor as well. And so they observe this holiday. It's written down. It's in the decrees. It's kept forever, et cetera, et cetera. And then 10, right, just kind of wraps up the story, if you will. It almost reads like, it's very short. It reads like when a movie is over and the credits roll, and then you see what happened to people after the movie. Sometimes you have this humorous, or if it's a biography, it'll tell you, as opposed to like, oh, so-and-so went on to do this and became such and such, right?
Right.
And this is kind of like what's happening here. It's like credit rolls. Yeah, let me tell you about Mordecai and what happened to him, what he went on to do, right?
starts with his tax. Oh,
Yeah.
he taxed everybody.
Yeah.
Got richer because of it, you know?
There's a tax imposed on the land and the coastlands of the sea, okay, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of the Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all of his people. Or some will say to all of his descendants, right? And so, yeah, what did Mordecai do with his position, right? He's placed in this position of power. What does he do with that, right? Well, he becomes very popular. Why does he become very popular? Because he uses his position to seek the welfare of his people and his descendants, and he speaks peace, right? This is what he does with this position. He doesn't become Haman 2.0, right?
Right.
And become inflated with his ego and mad that people don't respect him and do these things. Instead, he remains humble. He looks for the good of others. He seeks peace in his days. And so because of that, it says he becomes very popular and great amongst the Jews and remembered in that way. And that's also, I think, what we see before, right? The fear of Mordecai is spread over all of the satraps and governors and people of the province, right? Because he was very popular amongst the people as a whole. And so
even Haman's own family is like, hey, that guy's got God on his side.
Yeah.
Sorry, dude. You're in for it, you know?
Yep. And we see that exaltation sort of continue right through here, right?
Yeah.
And so Haman, goes from being great to being hung on the gallows and his family wiped out. And the reverse is true as well, right? We saw Mordecai was just at the king's gate, right? We don't really know. He has no position as far as we know. He's just always trying to find out what's good for Esther. And now he's been elevated sort of to the high position. So not only did we see the fall of Haman, we see the exaltation of Mordecai as well.
Because of his service to God and his humility. So he was honored, he was elevated because of his character rather than the opposite. So
yeah, and I don't know how many people that will listen to this will ever get into a position where they have the ability to be, great in the kingdom or great in something or great in some role that they're involved in, right? But this is sort of a good lesson for us as well, right? That what does he do with that, right? He uses his position, and just like Esther did, she used her position to work good for others. And I mean, I don't want to get political, but one of the things that makes me nuts is it seems like more and more our entire system of government here in America is I get to some position and then I use my position to benefit me, right? Supposedly I'm here to represent the people that sent me here, but really I'm just interested in representing my own interests, getting myself continually reelected, getting into a cush lobbying job when I come out, whatever, right? But it's not really about making the lives good for people. It's this idea that, you go up and you get, we have a saying, power corrupts, right? And so, Mordecai really seems to resist this. And so just a word to, what are the lessons can we learn? Hey, if you get into a position like such a thing, be a Mordecai, right? Don't be a Haman, be a Mordecai.
Right.
Use that to benefit others. Use that to speak peace. Use that to take care of the people, right? That's what you ought to do with those positions that God put you in.
Absolutely. Well, that was a fantastic study. I love the opportunity we had to study the book of Esther and to kind of glean all those stories for us and all those lessons that are out there for us. And we don't necessarily have a plan for what we're going to study next. So next week will be a big surprise for everybody. And we will make that determination here in just a little bit. We never like to leave the end of a podcast like this without offering our help to you. We have a couple of people that have reached out and asked for our prayers, and you're definitely in our minds and in our prayers. I know that we don't necessarily know your first names and last names, but we're praying for you. So if you need anything, don't feel like you can't reach out and ask for help. And if you have any Bible questions, we'd love to answer those as well. So give us a thumbs up and a like and share it with your friends. And we'll see you next week.